There are just 19 days to go. The two people about to take the stage tonight want power. They want to run the country on your behalf. To get that, they need your vote. Tonight, in front of this audience of uncommitted voters, we plan to make them earn it. Please welcome the leaders of the National and Labour parties, Bill English and Jacinda Ardern. Now, earlier tonight, we tossed the coin to decide who would get the first question. So my first question tonight is to you, Bill English. A key part of leadership is trust and whether voters can trust you. So is it possible to survive politics without lying?
You can certainly earn trust. We were trusted to get New Zealand out of recession, to bring the books back into surplus. Through that period, we always said we'd protect the most vulnerable. We did what we said we would do. That's what earns trust and credibility. It's critical to leadership. And now we've got the opportunity to build on that trust and the strength of New Zealand to take us to another whole level as a better country. Okay, but my question was, can you survive politics without lying? You can survive politics dealing with the situations you've got, doing the best. None of us is perfect, Paddy. None of us is perfect. But people can figure out what matters to them, whether you will do what you said you would do. We've built up a record of that, and trust in a team matters as well. I've got a great team. I trust them, they trust me. Okay, well, in terms of the Todd Barclay scandal, why did you tell New Zealanders that you were, and I'll quote you here, just a bystander, when you actually sent 450 texts to the woman involved? Is truth and trust a sliding scale for you, Bill English? No, it isn't. That was a very difficult personal dispute between two people that I happen to know, and I was very sad that it got to the point where it did. In the context of this election, that's been dealt with. We've now got plans over the next 3 years. We've built a record of doing what we said we would do, and that's what we'll do in the future. Okay, Jacinda Ardern, you haven't been tested on these sorts of trust issues that Bill English has been confronted with, but if you are caught in a lie or caught intentionally misleading the New Zealand public, how would you expect to be held to account? Well, I actually believe that it is possible to exist in politics without lying and by telling the truth. I do believe that, and I have been in politics for 9 years. Yes, politicians make mistakes, but a true mark of leadership is whether you front those mistakes, be as transparent as possible with the public when you make them. That's the sign of good leadership. You've never told a lie in politics? No. No, and if I have made a mistake, I've fronted it. And I'm going to make them in the future too, Paddy, let's be clear. But it's all about fronting them when you do. Okay, I want to turn now to trying to be constructive. And this question is to both of you, and I'll start with you, Jacinda Ardern. What is the one policy on the other side that you would like to take on? The one policy that I'd like to take on from that, well, actually, I have to say the GP announcement around making doctors' visits more accessible for community service card holders. When I saw the government announce that, I thought that's a good idea. You copied it. I acknowledge it. Yeah. And we took it on because it was a good idea. I acknowledge that. Okay, Bill English, what's the one idea from the other side that you'd like to take on? Well, we've taken on the free GP visits, particularly for under 13s. That's a few years ago. But I'll tell you the one they should take on, and that is our social investment policy, because because this is focused on changing the lives of the most vulnerable people in New Zealand. I thought Labour would take that policy on, but they haven't. So the National Party is much better equipped to deal with our most dysfunctional families, intergenerational welfare. That's the policy every party should take on. Bill, it's called early intervention, and Labour was built on it. Well, not like this. If that was the case, we wouldn't have the very significant social problems that were left behind by the last Labour government. We're going to come to those social problems later on, Bill English. Now, I want to start with housing tonight, and this is a yes-no question. Bill English, I'll start with you on this. Do you want house prices to drop, yes or no? I want them to stay flat while incomes rise. Jacinda Ardern, do you want house prices to drop, yes or no? Oh, I want them to stay, currently for homeowners, the ones who have their homes, yeah, we don't want them to lose their value, but we want more affordable housing in the market as well, and that's what's missing.
Okay, well, in Auckland, average house prices are more than $1 million, as you know. You've said, Labor has said you want house prices to drop nationwide by about half.
We want there to be affordable housing available. There's a difference there. We're not building affordable homes. In Auckland, on average, we're building homes that are closer to 200 square metres. That's not what our first home buyers are looking for. They're looking for townhouses, small houses, 100 square metres. That's what's missing from the market. That's what we've said we'll build.
But you've said, Labor has said you want to drop house prices, and the other side of the coin to that, other than people getting into the market, is that people who own houses lose value in what they've worked their guts out to achieve.
It's about affordable housing being available. And those who are out there looking for homes right now know that that is not on the market. And it's not just that, Patty, it's the fact that $150,000 is the average deposit for someone to get into a home. That is due to a failure of leadership, 9 years of not acknowledging that we have a housing crisis in Auckland in particular, and that is locking out first home buyers. I don't accept that.
But at the same time, if you want to drop house prices, you are going to carve value out of people's
As I've
assets.
said, it's not about losing value for current homeowners. It's about the fact there's not enough supply of affordable homes. That means building those affordable homes.
Okay, Bill English, is your government responsible for killing the Kiwi dream of home ownership?
A few weeks ago, I went and visited a couple out in one of the subdivisions down here south of Auckland, saw the deep satisfaction they had from walking into that new home. They'd had to work really hard to get it. I want that for every New Zealander who thinks that that's their right. So over the next 3 years, we are going to help 60,000 first home buyers with KiwiSaver Home Start into their first home. And it's that motivation. I mean, my kids are part of that generation. That's why we've spent 4 or 5 years changing everything from the way the Reserve Bank works to a new Auckland unitary plan to special housing areas so that we get the houses built and we can now get at 60,000 first home buyers into them.
Well, I'll pick up on that because you said you've changed everything, but house prices have flattened out at an average of $1 million. You haven't done enough.
Well, the house prices were rising at 20% per year, Paddy. It was getting out of hand. That's why people were getting so anxious about it. Now they've flattened out. In some places, Christchurch, actually, they're falling a bit because we had a huge rebuild back there 5 or 6 years ago. So we know how to do this. The houses are coming. 30,000 first home buyers have used Home Start. Another 60,000 will just over the next 3 years.
Bill, you know how to do this. You've had 9 years. You've had 9 years of practice, and we're in the position now where first home buyers are staring down the face of home ownership that's the worst it's been in 60 years. I don't accept that our teachers, our nurses, our police officers can't get into their first home. I do not accept that that is the future for this country. We've got to do things differently. You've had 9 years. It's time to hand over to someone who has a vision and a plan.
No, we've got a vision for the housing. There's 30,000 houses a year getting built. I'll tell you what will stall that. Capital gains tax comprehensively and cutting back the immigration that supplies the skills.
Yep.
Labor's actual policies will stall the house build.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that because your key policy of Kiwi Build, Jacinda Ardern, building 100,000 houses over 10 years, that relies on immigration, and at the moment we are 56,000 people short in the construction industry. And Bill English, as he says, you want to stop immigration.
No, let's be honest. Resolving this issue is going to take a comprehensive approach. It means stopping foreign speculators from buying existing homes.
Where are the builders going to come from?
It means building more houses. And yes, we estimate we probably need about 5,000 to work in construction for this plan.
56,000.
And I have seen in New Zealand,
You're 51,000 out with those 5,000.
I've seen in New Zealand that we have that skill and talent. And yes, we've created a Kiwi Build visa to bring in the extra talent that we need, but we're going to train our own as well.
How many are on that visa? How many are on that visa?
In total, we believe we need about 5,000 in the construction sector. Some of that is going to come from New Zealand, though, Paddy.
The construction sector with 500,000 people that's growing at 10% per year and has been for 3 or 4 years. 5,000's nothing.
Yeah.
It will stall the build.
Well, Jacinda Ardern, how many KiwiBuild visas are there?
We will have enough from within New Zealand, and we will bring an extra
do you know the number of
skill
your
set.
policy?
We've said 5,000 overall. Some will come from New Zealand, Paddy, and some will come from overseas.
The policy says 1,500, Jacinda Ardern, not 5,000.
5,000 total. Some will come from New Zealand, of course, Paddy.
Some builders will get a visa.
MIT,
New Zealand builders will get a visa to work in
and
Auckland.
EIT last week. We know that we have young New Zealanders training now in those foundation courses to move into our trades. We have that skill base here. We'll bring in the extra that we need. I am not so unambitious to say we can't do this because we don't have the construction industry to do it. That is not true.
Bill English, I want to come to you on homelessness. Your government has purchased 4 motels. You have got taxpayers into the motel business. Just to try and keep up with the tide of homelessness, will you have to buy any more motels?
We've set up... Are you selling them?
It's not a joke.
Are you selling them, Paddy?
I'm not selling them. People need to live in them. People need to live in them, Bill English. Will you have to buy any more? It's a serious question.
We understand how the high prices in the market have put some real pressure on some people, and there's a couple of things we're doing to help deal with that. Do you realise we spend $2 billion a year now on rental subsidies? We subsidise 60% of all private rentals in this country, and we're going to increase that on the 1st of April next year, where some people with quite high rents and low incomes will get $100 a week. So we'll do what it takes to make sure people have somewhere with a roof over their head that is warm and dry. Getting the 30,000 houses built, 100,000 over the next 3 years, that is going to give us the space to get people into those houses. We've got 8,000 transitional housing places. We're pulling every lever to make sure those families have a roof over their head.
Subsidising the private rental market instead of building state houses. Instead, the government has been selling state houses. We're 3,000 houses down.
No, that's not true.
It is true.
No, it's not true.
It is true.
No, it isn't.
And, at the same time, why weren't we building them? Why weren't we building them? $140,000 a day on hotel
you want
rooms.
to end homelessness within 2 terms, but you accept also that there's 41,000 homeless. That's the number you accept, isn't it? How are you going to do that?
We accept that it means making sure there are more emergency bed spaces. Absolutely.
Adopting our policies.
But at the same time, we've...
Okay.
Bill, with all due respect, your policy is homelessness moving into Te Puia Marae and being housed in motels.
No,
that is not a solution.
Haven't you seen the transitional housing in your own city? In Brown Road, the project we just announced yesterday with the Inner City Mission.
Let's change things up before we head to the break. Bill English, last time you were leader, you led National to a historic loss. This time, as you know, it's close and you could lose again. I'm going to make this question hard for you. It's a quick one. You can't answer experience. I want you to tell New Zealand what's different about you this time than last time, and you can't say experience.
I got up again. And I saw how this country built from the bottom of a recession to one of the best performing economies in the developed world, a credible country that can be great.
Jacinda Ardern, you've never been a minister, you've never been in government. You lack some crucial experience. Tell voters in New Zealand tonight one thing that you have, one personality trait that your very experienced opponent doesn't.
Generational change and a vision for the future of New Zealand.
All right, well, before we go to the break, if one of these candidates has said something you think is false, well, you can request a fact check at the Newshub Facebook page, and you can also join the conversation on Twitter with the help of our Twitter panel of Emma Esfiner, Lewis Holden and Tim McCready. Just use the Decision17 hashtag. Now, after the break, we are all about the money, your money. Which one of the 2 leaders will put more of it in your pocket? Okay, welcome back to the Newshub Decision 17 Leaders Debate. And this break is all about the money, your money. But first, I want to start with the way that the government spends the money. And today, Jacinda Ardern National launching an attack on the way that Labor has set up the books, saying that there is an $11 billion hole in the books.
Patty,
what's going on?
That is an absolute fiction. We've had Brian Fallow, Bernard Hickey, Vernon Small and an independent economist, Burl, who verified our fiscal plan, all come out and say what National said was a complete fiction. But I want to actually address the elephant in the room. I know what National are trying to do here is damage Labor's economic credibility, even though we ran 9 budget surpluses. We had the strongest continuous economic growth since World War II. We got net Crown debt near to zero. We set them up for a good run when the GFC hit.
Okay.
And despite that, I know they're trying to hit our credibility. That is why we produced a fiscal plan.
Yeah.
That is why we demonstrated our economic credibility. We put it out there for everyone to see, and we had it independently verified.
Okay, Bill English, is there 11... Your finance spokesman, Stephen Joyce, says there's an $11 billion hole in that red book. Is he right?
Well, we better hope that's the updated version, because it's changed since 10 o'clock this morning when Stephen Joyce put out the press release. They'd already altered some of the facts on the website to try and make the numbers add up. Look, the numbers don't add up, and this is why. When you look at how they've calculated things, what they've done is this. They've said, let's say the police get a pay increase. What they've said is we've got enough money to pay it for 1 year, but not for the years after. So they just haven't rolled it out, and that means the effect of it is, while they've allocated money to health and education, they haven't got any left for anything else. Now, the government runs security services, it runs defence forces, it runs police, it runs services for vulnerable children. There's nothing in the Labor budget for those. So here's the point, Patty.
I'm happy to correct that. I'm happy to correct that.
They have to fill the gap either with higher taxes, which I believe would now be inevitable under Labor, or borrowing.
Let me correct that.
Jacinda Ardern, come in.
We have based these figures on exactly what the government books have said themselves. It's based on pre-fu, Bill. So if it's not in there, it means you haven't budgeted for it either. It is based on pre-fu.
No, that is simply wrong.
It is based on pre-fu.
That's simply wrong.
That is based on pre-fu.
Okay. We've got an $11 billion argument here. Only one side can be right. Who is it?
We're right because, look, Patty.
Wait, do you know what?
Okay.
One final thing.
Patty, I can remember when our deficit was $18 billion.
All right.
And I've tracked every dollar for 8 years as the finance minister. I know what's in the pre-election update.
Let's be fair to voters.
I know that how they're counting it leaves a huge
Bill,
gap.
let's be fair to voters. Of course.
Oh, we're wanting to tell voters.
Let's be fair to voters, if I may. Let's be fair to voters. You and I both know this is just going to sound like two bickering politicians. We knew that. Well, let's be honest. Let's be honest. Let's call a spade here. That's what this sounds like. We knew that would happen. That's why we put someone in independently.
Okay.
Because that's what this debate is.
Hey, we're going to leave the bickering and we're going to move on to something that we should be bickering about, which is
important to families.
Bill English, we're going to move on what's important to people, which is money in their pockets alongside your bickering. Now let's look at
Patty,
this bonfire.
it's not bickering to say it's wrong. If it's wrong, people need to know the facts.
Let's look at the bonfire of growth.
I'm ready.
We've got to get on to people's wages, guys. We've got to get on to people's wages. Let's look at the bonfire of growth that this country has been experiencing. We can all agree there's been a lot of growth, but many hard-working Kiwis haven't had a decent pay rise in years. Bill English, do you think employers need to start sharing the love and sharing some of that growth around?
Patty, they are. I just looked at the figures that came out last week. Really interesting. The median wage in New Zealand in the last 12 months went up 3.6%, well ahead of inflation. And you know what was interesting? Women's pay went up quite a bit further than men's, and the gender gap dropped from 12% to 9%, and we now have the 5th lowest gender pay gap in the world.
Yep.
That is the benefits of a growing economy.
Yep.
No.
But you also know that if we look at real wages versus inflation, they've been pretty flat, and in fact Treasury forecasts them to be flat for a long time, and people out in New Zealand know that their wages aren't moving the way that you say they are when you use those statistics?
Paddy, the wages have been rising about twice the rate of inflation. You know how we know that? Because that's how National Super is calculated. The average wage has gone up $13,000 in the last 8 years. It'll go up another $4,000 or $5,000. If we keep our strong position as an economy, you'll get consistent and moderate wage increases. That's how families get ahead.
Ardern, you want to come in here?
Yeah, my question is, how do people feel? How do people feel? We know that in the last year, 2/3 of Kiwis who got a pay rise, it didn't keep pace with the cost of living. That's how people feel. They feel like they're going backwards. And that's because they are. An economy should be about people. That's what it should be about. So why are you going to put
their taxes up? If you're worried about their pay, why put capital gains tax, higher income tax,
we are not increasing any tax.
That's not caring for their pay.
We are not increasing any tax on wage and salary earners. That is patently false. That is scaremongering, Bill. You've done it this whole campaign, and I'm calling you on it.
We've legislated $1,000 a year.
Okay, we're going to come to the families package, Bill English. We're coming to the families package. Jacinda Ardern, you want to raise the minimum wage to help raise wages. How many jobs is that going to cost New Zealand? I've
had that question ever since I've been in politics, and yet when we were last in government, we raised the minimum wage 9 times in 9 years and had some of the lowest unemployment in the OECD. We've said $16.50. We know we can keep low unemployment with a raise like that, and actually we should aspire for our people to be able to pay for the cost of living through a minimum wage. If we don't keep moving, people won't be able to survive.
That's not aspiration. It'll go, it's $15.75 now. It'll be $16.50 pretty much by the year after next. That's not aspirational.
But bringing it up straight away is going to cost 5,500 jobs, according to the Ministry of Business and Employment.
Right. Minimum wage isn't aspirational. It's not. It's a floor. It's a minimum. We should aspire for New Zealanders to earn far, far more than the minimum wage. But as long as we have flatlining productivity, we will not see wage growth in this country. That's why we need a change. After 9 years, Bill hasn't invested in skills. He hasn't invested in innovation, and that's our problem.
Now, when you axe National's tax cuts, you are going to take away $500 or $1,000 from over 1 million Kiwi families. Why don't you trust these people to spend their own money, Jacinda Ardern? Why don't you trust them to spend their own money?
When we axe National's tax cuts, we're axing a tax cut for me. We're axing a tax cut for Bill. What we're putting in instead is a package that means that 70% of families will be better off than that tax cut package because they're the ones who need it, not me and not Bill. And that's
Bill
what we've decided.
I'll bring you in here. What are you going to spend your... What are you going to spend your $1,000 tax cut on?
Well, meeting the costs of a family, because I've got 6 kids and they're doing all sorts of stuff and they need a bit of help. And so do quite a few of my relatives. Look, this isn't about me and Jacinda. This is about hard-working people on the average wage who deserve to be able to keep a little bit more of their cash. The alternative is it gets taken away. Here's Paddy, here's an interesting thing.
We're going to come to her on capital gains now, Bill.
I just want to talk about who misses out.
Let him keep talking,
please. Generational... Let's talk about the generations. All people who earn over $44,000 who don't have children will be worse off under Labor. It's absolutely clear.
Jacinda Ardern, I want to pick up on the capital gains tax that could come in next term. Now, you've ruled it out as applying to the family home, but could it apply to the family batch, the family farm, or the family boat? Could it apply to those? So
what we have said is that we're going to extend the Bright Line test, so that was the pseudo-capital gains. Yep, I'll come to that, Paddy. Because we already have a pseudo form of capital gains. It only applies at the moment to people who flicker investment property within 2 years. We'll extend it to 5. Then when we come into office, we will do a review. We'll allow some experts to come in.
Jacinda Ardern, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I'm going to answer your question, though, Paddy.
The question is, will it apply to the family farm, the family boat, or the family batch? Tell New Zealanders. And as I said, the experts are going to advise us on the best thing to do to address housing affordability and the housing crisis. That is my focus. But I'm not going to predetermine what that group does. Look, just like any business who has issues in their business and they bring in a group of experts, they let them do the work, and then they assess whether or not it's going to solve their problems, and then they act. And what I am saying is that I want to preserve the ability to act in government in the
best interest of New Zealanders so they can own a home. That is my focus.
What kind of people are going to be on this group that is going to review this?
I'm going to allow Treasury to give us recommendations around people who have the expertise.
What do you think of this, Bill English?
The ex-finance minister doesn't trust
Treasury. There will
Treasury.
be capital gains tax, and it'll include the house that the teacher and the policeman who've got married and have bought a second house for their savings. It'll include them. It'll include the person who started up a new business, and as the value of that business grows, if they sell it, they'll have to pay capital gains tax. I don't know why Labor don't just say they want capital gains tax. And I'll tell you, Patty, when you look at the way they've added up their spending numbers in the $11 billion hole, capital gains tax is inevitable.
Patty, let me be clear.
Higher income taxes are inevitable.
What demonstrates better the fact that I want to make sure that we allow the experts to give us the advice that's going to work than the fact that I have not budgeted for there to be any money from this? I've not budgeted a cent from it because I genuinely want to see what the experts come back with.
All right, coming up in the Newshub Leaders Debate, 1 in 7 kids in this country lives in poverty. What are these two going to do about it? Welcome back to the Newshub Decision 17 Leaders Debate, live from the Vodafone Event Centre in Manukau. Now, there are 155,000 children who are materially deprived. That means a child who walks to school without proper shoes, who goes without a decent meal every second day, the heating may have been turned off at home to save money, and there won't be presents on their birthday. This isn't made up, these are just some of the agreed measures of poverty. Bill English, I want to start with you. Why won't you commit to a target to reducing child poverty?
Well, here's a start, Paddy. On the 1st of April next year, because of the package we put in place in the budget, child poverty in New Zealand, according to the standard international measure, will drop by 30%, 50,000 fewer kids in poverty. I'm proud of that. We can do that in New Zealand now because we've got a strong economy, we've got the government books in order, and we're really understanding the drivers of poverty. And you know what we will do? If we can get elected, within 2 or 3 years, we can have a crack at the next 50,000 children, getting them out of poverty. Because there's two things you need to do. One is lift incomes. The other is get inside the very difficult, toxic mix of social issues, which we know are family violence, criminal offending and long-term welfare dependency. We've got the best tools in the world now to support rising incomes with cracking the social problems.
Okay.
I'm proud of what we've done and I want to really have a go at it.
So is that a target then? So is that your target then? Are you committing to one tonight of bringing 100,000 kids out of poverty? Because you can actually make that a target. You've got a target for everything else.
Yes, I am committing to that.
Jacinda Ardern, Bill English has just committed to a target on child poverty. What's your target?
And I'm pleased about that because actually we've been asking him to do that for 9 years. And that's the issue. So I applaud that. I do applaud that, but you know the fact is that we actually do. We do have 290,000 kids, Bill, living in poverty in New Zealand, and actually we're a prosperous nation.
It's not correct.
So what's your target again?
It's not 290,000, and the number has been reducing. Did you know this week?
Has been our problem.
You know this week?
This has been our issue these last 9 years.
Compared to 5 years ago, the 60,000 fewer kids wake up tomorrow morning in a benefit-dependent household.
Paddy, I can resolve this issue.
So, well, you went, listen, 60,000 fewer kids wake up in a benefit-dependent household. That's a big change for those families. The parents can get work because we've got a strong economy. The kids get good schooling.
Jacinda Ardern, you want to get in?
All we've asked is actually to stop this from happening. Let's just put those targets into law. Let's put them into law. Then we stop this dispute and we get on with actually fixing child poverty in this country.
No, you actually need some policy.
That's what we need to do.
You actually need some policy.
And we've got that too.
What's the policy? What's the policy to reduce poverty?
Well, Jacinda Ardern, if you want to put
Apart from putting up taxes.
Jacinda Ardern, if you want to put it into law, what's your target? Because you could be Prime Minister in 20 days' time.
At least 10% on material deprivation, even further than that when it comes to relative incomes. But what we want to do,
that's way short of what I said.
That's less than him.
But he's not even agreeing. He's not even agreeing that there are 290,000 children in poverty.
Okay. Well, we're going to drop it 50,000 on the 1st of April. In 2 or 3 years, we can drop it another 50,000. That's 100. That's our target. And yours is 10% reduction.
Actually,
that's 27,000.
Do you know what I've committed to? My entire reason for being in politics is to rid this country of child poverty, to rid it of child poverty.
Okay. Very quickly, a quick answer on this then. When will you do that by if you become Prime Minister?
We're going to put it into law. Look, I want to get started straight away.
What actions will be taken? 70%. Passing a law doesn't get rid of poverty, otherwise it'd be all gone 100 years ago.
Bill, do you mind?
What actions will Labor take to reduce poverty?
Yeah, how will you do it?
Straight off the bat, working for families' tax credits means 70% of families will be better off, including every single child currently living in poverty.
We're doing that.
Winter energy payments, an extra $700 for beneficiary families from the months of May to September so they can heat their homes. And also our Best Start package. We know that most children living in poverty are living in poverty from the ages of 0 to 3. That's because their families are unable to go both into work because they're caring for their kids and it's harder for them to put food on the table.
Okay.
$60 a week for those families, we know it'll make a difference.
What do you make of this?
A big chunk of the Best Start package, $3,000, it's going to be paid to every family, so it goes to the 80% of families who actually don't necessarily need it, but do get support through working for families. That's precisely the problem. To deal with poverty, you've got to focus in on what drives it, not spray money around across every family in New Zealand.
Bill,
and now we know what drives it.
Jacinda,
Bill, if you know what drives it, why after 9 years do we still have the same figures around inequality, the same figures around child poverty? You've tried your ideas, they haven't worked. I have a positive vision for all children being lifted up in New Zealand.
Go to the Social Investment Board here. Paddy, you know what that shows? It shows the Labor Party are out of touch with what's happening on the front line. Because right around the country, social workers, teachers are involved in social investment. We're targeting right in on the families who need support.
We've got to move on, Bill
English. And we'll
English.
deal with them one by one if that's what it takes.
We've got to move on, Bill English. Jacinda Ardern, change of topic here. If you become Prime Minister, will you commit to keeping the age of super at 65 for as long as you're in the job?
Yes.
You'll resign rather than raise it?
We'll keep it at 65 and we'll start putting contributions back into the superannuation fund so we can afford for Kiwis to retire.
And you'll resign rather than raise the age of super from 65? You will?
Well, isn't that letting down her generation? Because they are going to have to pay the bill for that. We've outlined a long-term goal to lower the age, to increase the age of eligibility. We've given everybody 20 years, so today's 25-year-olds know they won't have to carry the burden of those extra 2 years.
Hang on,
Jacinda Ardern, because this is for Bill English.
Well, you know, we hear all this stuff. We hear all this stuff about
Bill English, John Key, your predecessor, he said he'd resign rather than raise the age of super.
Yep.
Jacinda Ardern has just said she'll resign as Prime Minister rather than raise the age of super. I know you don't want to do it, but is there something, before we go to the break, that you would resign over rather than do?
I just want to do the best thing for this country because I love the country and we can do a great job with it.
There's nothing you resign
I'm not resigning.
Okay, you're right, all right. Okay. Still to come, diffusing the growth bomb. That's coming up right after this break. Welcome back. Well, New Zealand, as everybody knows, has been hit by a growth bomb. Our population is currently 4.8 million. We get a new New Zealand resident, though, every 6 minutes from immigration. Jacinda Ardern, I want to start with you on this. What do you think the ideal New Zealand population is?
Well, at the moment, we can't house the people who are coming into New Zealand, particularly Auckland. And so we do have to do something about that. We want to change the settings.
Put a number on it. Put a number on it.
We've said that we believe it needs to come down by between 20 and 30,000.
So New Zealand's ideal population is about stable?
Back at about where we were in 2008 when it comes to immigration, which was roughly 40 to 50.
Our actual population of 4.8 million, you think it should stay pretty much flat?
Oh, no, look, we can take growth, particularly outside of Auckland. But if we'd properly planned for the intake we've got at the moment, then we'd be able to house them all.
No number?
When it comes to immigration,
Bill English, have you got a number on New Zealand's population that you think it should be at?
Oh, I think it'll be 5 million plus. That's where we're headed. And we're a country who can handle growth. You know, I remember what this country was like when it wasn't growing and when parts of it were going backwards, particularly back in the late 80s, early 90s. Boy, this is better. And we are up for it. I think my view is this. We can be a growing, successful country and we can handle what the pressures that go with it because we do the investment. The alternative is to stall the economy, slow things down. At the moment, the economy is driving that migration. We have to get the people in to do the jobs that need done.
Is Auckland coping?
Well, it's coping a lot better now that Waterview's open. It'll cope a lot better. Well, it is. That's how
Waterview is not a vision. Waterview is not a vision and it's not a plan.
Well, I'll tell you, a vision, you can't replace a vision, you can't replace a tunnel with a vision.
And it's ironically a tunnel.
Oh, so we're going to close the tunnel and have a vision. Is that how it's going to work? Let's try that before election day. We'll shut down all the projects and have a vision. Get rid of all the orange cones and see if people think they can live on the vision. Well, actually, they need the projects. Because we've got the growth.
That's right.
We can be a successful country.
Jacinda, I want to pick up on that because you've said there that you want to lower immigration, but we are, as we said earlier, 56,000 short in the construction industry, 200,000 short in the hospitality industry, but you want to take a breather. Will you take responsibility if you do that for killing the economy?
No, we've got to make sure that we're meeting our skills gap and bringing in migrants to fill that skills gap.
How?
But actually, at the same time, there are some areas where no one's benefiting. Like, for instance, those low-level education courses. They're not good for those migrant students who are getting a rough ride, and it's not good for New Zealand's reputation. Okay. I'm unapologetic about dealing with that.
I ask you again, how are you going to do it? How are you going to fill the skills gap and cut immigration? How?
Clearly, that's what our skills shortage list is for. We've got to make sure, though, it's accurate. We've set out exactly how we intend to do it. Those 20 to 30,000, a big chunk of those is coming from those low-level courses, which are bad for New Zealand and bad for migrant students.
Okay, Bill English, we are heaving at the seams in this country. Middlemore Hospital is full. There's 800 new cars on Auckland roads every week. Rents are skyrocketing because of housing pressure. You've let all these people in and you didn't have a plan, did you?
Well, the economy has drawn them in because it's going so well. And here's the biggest single group.
Where was the plan and is there a plan now? Where was the plan?
I'll tell you the bit where I agree we didn't plan. 5 years ago, 40,000 Kiwis a year were leaving for Australia. I admit we did not plan that the number now would be zero.
But you know as well as I do, and everybody else here does, that that's not the reason why Middlemore Hospital is full. That's not the reason why there's all these new cars on the roads. Be honest with New Zealand, immigration is going through the roof.
It is one of the most significant reasons. There's 150,000 more New Zealanders here than we did expect. And that's why we're now flat out with tools like public-private partnerships to build the hospitals, build the roads, build a couple of billion on public transport here in the middle of Auckland.
We wouldn't be having this conversation if there was a plan. We would not be having this conversation if there had been a plan. And population growth, that is not a plan for growing an economy. And yet that's what Bill's been relying on, us all selling houses to one another and immigration. That's his plan around economic growth.
Labor's got a plan.
My plan My plan is an economy that delivers for New Zealanders, investing in education and driving up skills, investing in innovation and research and development. That's an economy New Zealand can feel proud of, and one that will deliver high wages and good jobs.
Labour's plan is higher taxes, bigger government spending, more rules and regulation. That will stall the economy.
That is so last century.
Bill English, I want to come to you now, Bill English. We know from information released to us under the Official Information Act that we have got kids being taught in 3,700 prefabs in this country. So if you do the sums, that's say 30 kids a class, that's 111,000 kids in temporary classrooms in New Zealand. And you've just announced that you want to make an app so that parents can look at their kids' results. Have you got your priorities right?
Yes, we have. We've spent about $5 billion on schools on the catch-up from 20 or 30 years of poor management of the assets. We're spending $1 billion on new schools in Christchurch because we're only halfway through it because we've got to rebuild them. Paddy, the classrooms you're talking about are actually called modern learning environments. They are.
It's a jazzy name for a prefab.
Our schools are in better physical shape than they have ever been right now, and we're not finished yet. And we will stick with national standards. Labor are going to get rid of the national standards.
We'll leave national standards out of this because I want to come in on Jacinda Ardern's big promise of free tertiary education. Now, why are you giving the country's future lawyers, doctors, dentists, engineers, some of our highest earners, why are you giving them a year free?
And also the kids of factory workers, our future carpenters, our future plumbers. You know, if we're going to meet the challenges...
It's not very targeted, is it?
And secondary school isn't either. It's about recognising that actually if we want to prepare for the future, all of us need to keep training and retraining. And what we're saying with that 1 year free is that we want everyone, whether it's actually someone who already works on a factory floor who needs to retrain because their job's gone, it's as much about them as it is anyone else. That's where the future is going, Paddy. We've got to prepare for it.
Okay, this is a question for both of you. This is a question for both of you, and a quick answer on this, please. Māori feature in the worst statistics: imprisonment, health, education, you name it, they are in the worst place. Home ownership. I want to know what is the one policy in your arsenal that is going to make a difference for Māori. Bill English.
What we have done is we set a target for...
What one policy have you got?
I'm about to tell you a fact, Paddy. You know, this is what's actually happened.
I want a policy, though.
One policy. 5 years ago, about half of Māori kids were getting to NCA level 2. Today, 3/4 of them, and we're going to push that up over 80%. That is thousands more getting to the start line for further training and a decent job.
Okay. Jacinda Ardern, and quickly please, what is the one policy you've got that can make a difference to Māori?
All our plans around dealing with poverty and deprivation, because it affects absolutely everything. If you go to school on an empty stomach, Best Start, our families package, our winter energy payment, dealing with poverty.
Okay, before we... All right, let's change direction here, and I want to talk about Pike River. Jacinda Ardern, you are going to establish a minister for Pike River. So will that person take legal responsibility for any injury or death if people go back into that drift? Will that person take legal responsibility?
We accept we need to deal with the liability issues. That's part of our plan for the re-entry. That means if we need to draft a bill that says that, yes, a Crown entity takes on that liability, we accept that. It's got to be about bringing those children home.
Someone will take responsibility if there's
We'll work that through, because the primary point here is we've got to deliver those family their loved ones.
Bill English, do you 100% rule out a manned entry of that drift under any circumstances?
We would go with one if it was safe, but you have to have someone. You can't just work it through. You have to have someone who will take the personal. You don't rule out someone going back into that drift. Paddy, it's not a political decision.
No, I'm asking you to. I know it's not. I'm asking you to rule it out.
Well, I'm not going to rule it out because it may be technically possible.
Still to come on tonight's debate: conscience issues, New Zealand's place in the world, and dealing with Winston Peters. Stay with us for that. Right, welcome back to the Newshub Decision 17 Leaders Debate here in front of our awesome audience of uncommitted voters. Okay, let's go global. And I want to come to you first, Jacinda Ardern. Does the Donald Trump presidency mean that the world is a more dangerous place?
Oh, look, some of the rhetoric we're seeing is, certainly worrying. And it would be very clear to people that my values are different to Donald Trump. So I think what we all need now, particularly with North Korea, is for everyone to take a step back and be calm.
Okay,
I imagine voters at home are sitting there thinking, how is it that we could be on the brink of a catastrophe right now? How is it that we're in that place?
Has Donald Trump made the world more dangerous? That was the question.
I'd say from what we're seeing now, it feels that way.
Okay, that's a yes. Bill English, do you think Donald Trump has made the world a more dangerous place?
I think actually North Korea has made the world a more dangerous place.
Okay, we'll come to North Korea, but has Donald Trump made the world a more dangerous place, yes or no?
No, I just said, I think North Korea has, and the way Donald Trump deals with it is pretty critical, because if they miscalculate, we'll have a hell of a mess.
Okay, well, I'll ask you about North Korea then. Here's a scenario. It's 3 a.m. North Korea and the United States are at war, and your phone rings, and it's Donald Trump asking you to join him in war against North Korea. What do you say?
I would say to him that while we've had a long friendship with the US, we make our own decisions on our own interests, and that if he has a specific request, then we would consider it. And when we're considering that, we would take into account New Zealand's interest in the peace and stability of the Asia-Pacific region. And look, Paddy, that would be a very, very challenging situation. And, we'd have to get all the advice we could. The basic friendship with the US is probably less important in that case than stability for the Asia-Pacific.
Okay, so in this scenario, Donald Trump wants a commitment. He wants it right away. You can't ring him back tomorrow. What do you say to him?
I wouldn't give him a commitment over the phone. That would not be fair, because the New Zealand public would need to understand if there was going to be, particularly if there was some kind of military commitment, about which we're very, very careful. I mean, we have a lot of discussion just over a few people going to Afghanistan to do training.
Sure. Jacinda Ardern, I want to bring you in on the same scenario. Donald Trump's asking you to commit troops to a war with North Korea. Do you say yes or do you say no?
Of course, we want to be able to preempt that. It's never too late to talk, and that's what we need now. And in fact, the response I would give to Donald Trump would be the same one I'd give in the situation right now. The UN needs to be brought in. China is a critical part of resolving the dispute we have now. Let's resolve it before it escalates even further.
Okay, our major ally wants your commitment. What would you be saying to him?
Actually, I agree with a lot of what Bill said on that. You've got to make it. You've got to forge your own path. We would go back to the UN. We've always taken a multilateral approach and done what's in the best interest of New Zealand.
So that would be a no to Donald Trump in that scenario, Jacinda Ardern, because you know that the UN would veto it.
I would go to the UN, Paddy.
Okay. All right. Now, turning now to home turf, back on home turf. The latest Reid research poll has shown Winston Peters as the kingmaker. So, a few yes or no's here. His price for support is the Prime Minister's job for a temporary time. Would you do it, yes or no, Jacinda Ardern? Bill English?
No.
What about that was just a warm-up. I knew you were going to say that. What about the Deputy Prime Minister's job, yes or no?
Well, it depends on the voters. It does.
Jacinda Ardern, Deputy Prime Minister's job, is that up for grabs?
That one's not off the table, but I'm not saying absolutes here, because we do have to negotiate.
What about Finance Minister? Is that off the table?
Off the table.
Is that off the table?
Yes.
What about Associate Finance Minister?
Paddy, this isn't some sort of auction. Voters...
Bill English, I know it's not an auction, it's an election.
I know. Well, and you guess what elections are about? Elections are about voters deciding who the government is.
I think everyone's aware of this.
Not the commentators or Winston Peters.
So you won't rule them out for an associate finance job. What about you, Jacinda Ardern? Would you rule them out?
Yeah, it is a negotiation. You're asking us to put all our cards on the table now. Ultimately, it's what voters give us is what we have to work with.
Okay, so what personal attributes then do you have, Jacinda Ardern, that Bill English doesn't have that would make Winston Peters more appealing to go with you? What personal attributes do you have?
I don't have baggage.
Bill English. Bill English, what do you have that Jacinda Ardern doesn't have that would make Winston Peters want to come with you?
Well, look, that's a matter for Mr Peters. All I'd say is voters should pick what sort of government they want, not leave it to him. I've known Winston Peters a long time. He knows politics inside out. Whatever voters, whatever situation they give us, you're obliged to make it work so that New Zealand can have stable government.
Sure. Okay, I'm going to read out a list now, and I'm going to have to read it pretty quick because it's quite long. It's Winston Peters' bottom line, some of them actually. Okay, rail upgrade for Northport, shift the Auckland port to Northland, stay with 65 as the super age, manned re-entry to the Pike River Drift, and a referendum on the Māori electorates. Now, I want you guys to give one thing off that list that you won't give Winston Peters. Jacinda Ardern, what won't you give Winston Peters off that list?
I'm actually just going to answer the question based on what Labour's campaigning on. We've said no to a referendum on the Māori seats, because actually all of this has to be about what Labour is campaigning on. That's all we can do.
That's an out-and-out no to Winston Peters on that.
As I've already said this, Paddy. And actually, we have to be able to campaign on our own party's policies rather than what coalition partners
Bill
might
English,
want.
what on that list would you say no to Winston Peters on? Is there anything on that list you'd say no to him on?
Paddy, I'm not negotiating with you.
So those are all on the table?
I'm out there getting more votes for National because I know that'll be the best thing to have a stable government after the election.
Jacinda Ardern, I want to turn now to a conscience issue. At the moment, and Bill English, you'll get this question too, at the moment it is actually illegal under the Crimes Act to have an abortion. The main way that women get it is by saying that having a child is a serious danger to their mental health, and that forces a lot of women to lie. Should we change that law?
Yes.
Will you do it if you become Prime Minister?
Yes, it shouldn't be in the Crimes Act. It shouldn't be in the Crimes Act. Look,
So,
Paddy,
that will be a government bill to change that law under Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister.
It shouldn't be in the Crimes Act. Look, I take a very simple view on this.
You'll change the law, no review, nothing?
It should be out of the Crimes Act. I'm very clear on that.
No review, nothing.
People need to be able to make their own decision. And I accept, Paddy, that there will be people out there who disagree with abortion. I want them to have that as their right. But I also want women who want access to have it as their right too. This is about everyone being able to make their own decision.
Yeah. Bill English, we know that as a devout Catholic you are against changing abortion laws, but you changed your mind on marriage equality. So could you change your mind on abortion?
No, I wouldn't. But I do support the law as it stands. It is rightly a conscience issue for Parliament. We would not make it a party political issue. But if the changes came before the Parliament, I'd be opposed to liberalising the law. But I support the current law. I would not set out to change it, and the National Party wouldn't.
Should it be in the Crimes Act, though, Bill?
But Parliament can make its own decision. Well,
I am interested. Should it be in the Crimes Act?
That's a matter for Parliament. It happens to be the historical way from the 1970s that our law was constructed. There's been attempts to change it. It has not changed. It seems to operate on a day-to-day basis in a way that's broadly satisfactory, and so I support the current law.
Okay, so turning now to the decriminalisation of cannabis. Let's say there's a proposed law put up that means no charges if you're caught with 40 grams or less, about the size of a muesli bar. Would you?
You expect people to eat it?
Would you vote for that, Bill English, decriminalisation along those lines?
No, I wouldn't at the moment. There's a few countries who are trying decriminalisation. I believe someone has to make the case there'd be less harm from decriminalisation. Effectively, the police exercise discretion now, so I suppose in that sense you've got pragmatic, low criminalisation of it in New Zealand. But look, this is a drug which, despite years of debate in New Zealand, still remains an illegal drug. And the reason for that is because you can see the damage it does to people. Now, if these other countries like Portugal or Colorado in the US can show that a more liberal regime would mean less harm, then I'd look at it. But at the moment, I wouldn't change the law.
So you're kind of open to it down the track, potentially. Jacinda Ardern, would you vote for that? Decriminalisation along those lines. Would you vote for that?
Yeah, we're not campaigning on that, Paddy, but what I would like to see is the Law Commission has done an incredible piece of work that says that they'd like to see us take much more of a health-based approach instead of a criminal justice-based approach.
It's a conscience issue here. Yeah. Would you decriminalise it or not? Bill English has said no, not right now.
That's not in our plans.
No,
but
it's your view that we're looking for here. It's your conscience on decriminalisation.
And that is what I'm sharing. sharing here. I don't want to see...
So no to decriminalisation.
But I do want to see some change. I want to see us dealing with this as a health issue rather than a justice issue. Locking someone up for smoking weed is a waste of money and doesn't help fix an individual's problem. Putting them into rehab does.
Okay. But if you say that, then why won't you vote for decriminalisation? If locking someone up is a waste of time, why won't you give a straight answer?
Because we could do that now. Because we could do that now, but we're not. We're not doing it because we haven't invested enough in rehabilitation and support for drug addiction and alcohol addiction services.
All right, we'll be back soon after the break for a final round of what's called quickfire. That's quickfire questions, and there'll be some post-debate analysis and questioning as well of the leaders, so do not go away. You don't want to miss this. Welcome back. Well, now it is time for our quickfire round, and quickfire means quick. So these questions are for both of you. If you lose the election, if you end up in opposition, will you resign as leader of your party? Bill English?
No.
Jacinda Ardern?
No.
So you're sticking around?
Yep.
Potentially. You're sticking around as well, potentially?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, we'll see a lot more of each other then. Now, if you could make a law right now, that would come into action right away, what would it be, Jacinda Ardern?
Child poverty eradication bill.
Bill English?
Oh, every young person, well, every child being able to get right through school and succeeding.
Okay. You said earlier on you couldn't make laws for that kind of thing.
That's right.
But I did give you the opportunity. Now, if Australia moves to take away more rights of Kiwis living there, as Prime Minister, the next time that they do that, are you prepared to retaliate and take something back off Australians here? Bill English?
No, I don't think that makes sense. We've just got a new path to citizenship for thousands of Kiwis in Australia.
So no retaliation. Jacinda Ardern, would you be prepared to stand up to Australia and retaliate if they take something away again?
Yes, if they lock us out of tertiary education, we'll lock them out here.
Okay, Jacinda Ardern, should Cabinet be 50-50 woman, a quota?
Yeah. Just checking whether or not yes, that should be, but I'm not sure we'll get there straight away. We've got it in our caucus.
Will you make a quota?
It should be.
Will you make a quota as Prime Minister?
I'll make a target, I'll make a goal. I'll make a goal out of it.
Okay.
Our caucus will be, and I'm proud of that. Our caucus will be.
Bill English, should Cabinet be 50-50 woman?
No, we won't have a quota. We've got fantastic ministers picked on merit, do a great job. Very proud of them.
Okay. What is your favourite childhood river, and would you swim in it today? Bill English?
Yes, the Ardern River, and I swam in it as a child, and I'd swim in it now, except that they've taken all the swimming holes away and pushed gravel into it.
Okay. Jacinda Ardern, what's your childhood river, and would you put your head under in there today?
Near where we used to go on camp around Port Waikato, but no, I wouldn't. But we can. Within a generation, we can if we work on it.
You wouldn't put your head under in your own childhood river? Okay. If you could give a knighthood to one New Zealander right now, who would it be, Jacinda Ardern?
Helen Clark, she wouldn't take it.
Bill English?
Well, when you're government, you get that opportunity. So the ones we want to give them to... Who would you give one to? No, the ones we want to give them to, Paddy, they're on the list. They get published. You'll see it.
Yeah, you don't have one you want to name tonight that would get one instantly?
Well, no, because they're not meant to find out. They're not meant to find out till New Year's Day.
Okay. What cause would you march in the streets for, Bill English?
I'd march in the streets for the right to govern this country, actually, because we're in a great position. We could really build on this fantastic little country, and I'm out in the street all the time.
You'd march for yourself to continue as Prime Minister. Okay. Jacinda Ardern, what would you march in the streets for?
Ending homelessness. Everyone having a home.
Jacinda, what's a sackable offence for a minister, Jacinda Ardern? What would you sack a minister over?
Deceit.
Bill English?
Yeah, misleading a leader. Okay.
What's worse, tax evasion or benefit fraud, Jacinda Ardern?
Both.
Can't say both, it's quick fire.
They both deprive taxpayers of money. Both of them should be pursued equally.
Bill English?
Yeah, both. And you'll get more of it. You get more of it, but I'll tell you, you get more tax evasion.
I did let her off on that.
You get more tax evasion if you have higher taxes.
Okay, name... Okay, name one person from the Others party that you would happily invite into your cabinet, Bill English.
Actually, I thought Annette King, but she's leaving.
She's just left, but okay. Jacinda Ardern, who would you invite in?
Chester Burrows.
He's just left as well, so Okay, final question before we finish up. Name one future leader of your own party from within your party. Jacinda Ardern, who's a future leader from within Labour?
People like Carmel Sepuloni, Penny Henare, Jenny Salisa. We've got a whole crop of them.
Okay, she named a lot. What about you, Bill English?
We've got a whole lot. And look,
who are they?
The one way to kill their prospects would be for me to name them.
You're not going to name one? All right. Well, that is the end of the debate. Thank you to both leaders, but this is not over yet. Lisa Owen is here with our panel to break down the debate and question the leaders.
Thanks very much, Patty. Just to let you all know, we're not letting the leaders off that easy. They're taking a quick breather and they'll be joining the panel a little later in the show. But with me now is our panel: Morgan Godfrey, political commentator; staff political editor Tracy Watkins; Matthew Hooton, political commentator; and Annabelle Lee, who is the executive producer of The Hui. Good evening to you all. Let's start by talking about who you think won and why. Morgan.
Well, I think tonight Jacinda Ardern felt like the Prime Minister in waiting, and the reason is she got to speak about vision and values. We heard that over and over again, vision and values, where Jacinda got to speak about how many more homes Labour will build. Bill English was left defending why there are too few homes for New Zealanders, and I think that's why Bill English struggled tonight, because he has a record of 9 years to defend, whereas Jacinda Ardern has a plan or has a vision for the next 9 years. She got to look to the future. He had to defend the past.
Tracy?
Yeah, and I think Jacinda Ardern came up with that great line, which she's used before, which is, "You've done what you came here to do." I think Jacinda Ardern was definitely not as nervous as she was in the first debate. Both of them came out firing tonight. This was a really sort of like a real fun, rollicking, fiery debate. They really were firing at each other, weren't they? And I think
yeah, they were.
They were, and they didn't leave anything behind today. Last week it was so polite. It was like they were walking around each other. Tonight there was none of that.
Matthew? Change in tactics on both sides, do you think?
I think Bill English's historic announcement that he wants to reduce child poverty by 100,000 in, as I heard it, about 2.5 years, was the major and most important aspect of the debate. And interestingly enough, for all that Jacinda Ardern talks about homelessness and child poverty, it is a far more ambitious goal than what Labour has publicly announced, although I imagine Jacinda will match it tonight if that's what the polls indicate she should do.
Annabelle?
I think Jacinda was the winner tonight. It's one thing to be relentlessly positive, but it's another thing to debate with passion and conviction, and that's what we saw this evening as opposed to her last performance.
So in terms of weak spots, it would be arguable to say that Labour's weak spot is tax and this idea of a tax commission. Did Jacinda Ardern cover her weak spot, Tracy?
Well, I didn't think particularly well. I think the problem was that National sort of set the scene earlier today with the $11 billion fiscal hole. I think they normally say that explaining is losing, but I think in this case that was Bill English's strong point, was trying to explain the numbers. You know, as he said, I've tracked every dollar as finance minister over the last sort of decade, and so I think he did dominate that part of the debate. Even though there's a lot of there's a huge question mark over those figures that National
and
put out today.
Timing. You released
the timing
this on
is
debate
definitely
day.
That was about turning this debate into one about the numbers and to one about tax and stewardship of the economy, basically.
Yeah, Morgan, was there anything that surprised you that you weren't expecting?
I was quite taken aback by the question of trust in the very first part of this debate, where Paddy asked the question, can you be a politician or can you go through politics without lying? And Jacinda answered the question straight, but Bill English was left with a complicated answer, and it's the kind of answer that doesn't look good when you're answering what is essentially a yes or no ethical question.
Yeah, I think he said we're all human, or words to that effect. Did you think that both candidates had more confidence this time? Did anyone come across? This time we had niggle, actual debate. So who seemed more confident with that?
I think the biggest change has come from Jacinda, seeing her interject more, seeing her defend her policies instead of standing at the lectern shaking her head. It seemed that Bill was still going after her weak spot being tax, but I think perhaps that he also runs the risk of people becoming a little bit jaded by that argument.
Matthew, what was Bill English's weak spot?
Well, his weak spot is incumbency. But I think, as I said, with that poverty target, that came out of left field. That's a brand new initiative. And so he did have something new. And I think he should have targeted Jacinda Ardern harder over tax, because it's quite clear that she is not telling the truth about her plans for tax.
All right, well, stay with us. We'll have more after the break. We'll talk to our leaders and see who they think won. Are they brave enough to call it? Back soon. Welcome back to the Newshub Decision 17 Leaders Debate. We're joined now by one of our leaders, Jacinda Ardern from the Labour Party. Give yourself a score out of 10. How did you do and who won it?
Oh, look, I'm my own harshest critic. I'm not going to call who won because these things always feel like even contests to me when I'm at the podium. Look, maybe for myself, maybe a 6. I always want to improve. I always know there's room for improvement.
But you won't say whether you won or not. Being Prime Minister is about tough decisions.
I felt like that was a good contest. That was a good contest of ideas. Do I back myself to be leader? Do I back myself to win this election? Yes.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the fact that you would march in the street to eradicate child poverty. What I'm not clear on from that is how you're going to do it.
Homelessness. But on child poverty, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm really clear on this. Our families package will lift every single child currently in poverty, will lift every single one of them. Our Best Start packages focused on the 0 to 3s, but actually also I want to make sure that you don't get that kind of exchange that you saw before. There is no clarity right now on our child poverty numbers in New Zealand. There's not, which is why that happened. We want to put measurement and targets in law so we don't get that kind of exchange, so the public knows what the real numbers are and they can hold us to account.
All right, I'm going to Tracy Watkins now. Your question for Jacinda Ardern.
This is the tax debate, which seems to have been bogging you down for the last few weeks. Why not seek a fresh mandate on any recommendations from the tax working group rather than implement them in the first term when people don't know what they're going to be voting for?
Because I don't want to wait 3 years. When I have solutions in front of me that will help with home ownership, I don't want to wait 3 years to implement them. You know, I want to make sure that I do everything I can to lift home ownership. You know, if a business has got a problem and they bring in experts and experts give them advice, you'd expect them to act on it, and that's what I'll do.
But isn't it something that could actually affect people financially, you know, in their planning and financial planning?
I've really set out that this is not going to apply to the family home. That's really, really important. This will not affect the income tax paid by wage and salary earners, despite what the Prime Minister says. My focus is on home ownership. And look, you know, once we implement whatever ideas come back that are going to make the biggest difference, voters within probably a year, 18 months will have the chance to vote on whether they think we've done the right thing, and that's their prerogative.
But Jacinda Ardern, you couldn't rule out a tax on the family batch, a tax on the car. What can you say now that will convince New Zealanders that you are not going to use voters as an ATM machine, which is what National would say?
Because I'm focused on home ownership. You know, I'm absolutely focused on making sure that we get to the bottom of this crisis we've got after 9 years of inaction. And that's what I'm telling voters. That's the reason I'm looking at this. Unlike Bill English, who in 2008 came in, started a tax review, told no one he was going to do it, and then increased GST, I'm telling voters this is my plan and the reason for it.
All right, Annabelle Lee's got a question for Jacinda.
Helen Clark has said that she has no regrets over her handling of the foreshore and seabed and she stands by her actions. Is she wrong?
I wouldn't have done it.
Wouldn't have done it?
No.
Why?
You know, I was working in Parliament when I saw that march on Parliament. It just didn't feel right to me. I know, though, that Helen was in the position of being Prime Minister. You know, what she had in front of her was very different to what I saw as an observer. All I know is that I wouldn't have done it.
Labor wants to lower the number of people in our prisons. Now, how do you propose to do that while keeping people safe?
Yeah, well, of course we have to keep people safe. But, you know, I've sat, for instance, in parole board hearings and I've seen the parole board deny parole even though they know that it's time for release and that person is no longer a threat because that person has no home to go to. You know, these are some of the problems that are starting to have effect on our prison population. The same with bail. You know, we've got to make sure that this housing crisis doesn't mean that we're now keeping people in the most expensive housing in the country, and that's prison.
All right, thank you very much for joining the panel, Jacinda Ardern. So, Matthew Hurton, any clearer on Labor's tax policy after that?
No, and I wonder why Labor does not simply announce the terms of reference and an indication who will be on this tax working group. I think for Jacinda Ardern to have said, when I'm Prime Minister, I'll ask the Treasury for some names, surely she's a stronger person than that, than just a technocrat that would ask the Treasury for some names. The Labor Party must have in mind who it is that they plan to set tax policy in New Zealand over the next years ahead if they're lucky enough to win this election. And I think that with polls opening in a week, Jacinda Ardern owes it to the people of New Zealand to explain who will be developing tax policy and what taxes are in and what taxes are out. And so far she is fluffing it.
All right, Bill English has joined us now, leader of the National Party. Very rarely in life do you get an opportunity for a do-over, but we're going to give you one. And it relates to the question about what you're going to do with your $1,000 tax cut. There was a ripple that went through the audience. I'm going to give you a chance to answer it again. What are you going to do with your $1,000 tax cut?
Well, I'll either save it or use it to support my family and the wider family that I regularly support.
Do you need it?
I don't need it personally, but I'll be able to use it. But the tax argument's not about me or Ms Ardern. It's actually about people on the average wage being able to keep a bit more of their hard-earned tax rather than having to pay what would happen. Those tax reductions are now legislated, as are the increase in child payments and the increase in accommodation supplement that will reduce child poverty by 30%. That tax reduction will be taken off them, and it'll be used, for instance, to make going through law school a bit cheaper.
All right, how did you go in that debate? Who was the winner, and what do you give yourself as a score out of 10?
Look, I was just focused on the issues, because the debate, in a sense, isn't just about whether I beat Jacinda or she beats me. It's whether the issues relate to the choices that voters are going to be making.
It is a competition, Mr English. Only one winner.
Well, no, the competition is actually the election, and the point of the debate, which I think has worked very well, is that voters get to hear the different points of view on the issues that matter to them, and I think they heard that tonight, and they will go and make their decisions. So win or lose in the debate, it's what happens in the ballot paper, on the ballot paper.
What's your score out of 10? Well,
I'm tough on myself as well. I'd go 6 or 7.
All right, 6 or 7, maybe 1 point more than Jacinda Ardern's self-assessment. Annabelle Lee has a question for you.
One child dies in New Zealand every 5 weeks as a result of child abuse. Can you commit to a reduction target that you can achieve within the next 3 years?
Yes, we already have. We have a target for reducing substantiated cases of child abuse, and over the last 3 years we were able to stop it rising and it flattened out, which is not near good enough. And now we know that you need pretty much one by one to deal with the families where that's happening. It's also the reason that we've completely revamped how we deal with New Zealand's most vulnerable children. The 4,000 or 5,000 in government care and the next 10,000 that could end up in government care. That large-scale change is underway right now with broad agreement, and we're very hopeful that it'll have an impact on those terrible statistics about substantiated child abuse. But we've had a target for 3 or 4 years, we've learned a lot, and in the next 5 years I believe we can make a very significant impact, because now we know much better which kids they are, what the risks are, and how to deal with their situation.
Mr English, you chose to announce a target for reductions in child poverty tonight. You've been 9 years in government. Why did you do that tonight? Why did you wait until tonight?
I think because it makes the point that we are reducing child poverty on the OECD measure on the 1st of April by 30%. That's 50,000 kids. I think people now understand that. They didn't used to know that, because we talked about these issues for a number of years, but because we are national, they don't necessarily sink into people. So,
but if you were so committed, why didn't you do it sooner?
We are committed, and that's why I've been saying for months now that we can do the family incomes package again in 2 to 3 years. If we manage government spending well, we can have that huge step forward and a further reduction of child poverty. I welcome the opportunity tonight to be absolutely clear about that. That is now essentially a target of 100,000, with 50,000 certainly happening on the 1st of April, and the next 50,000 will be tougher, but we're up for it.
You mentioned young people in the debate in a slightly different context, where you said lifting the age of superannuation to 67 helps ease the burden on the next generation, the generation that will pay for that superannuation. But how do boot camps and curfews help young people?
Well, let's think about the young people that we're talking about here. The announcement we made the last couple of weeks ago is about the 150 most serious recidivist violent offenders among 300,000 young New Zealanders up to the age of 17. Now, the choice is send them to prison, because they have been sentenced for up to 14 years, send them to prison, or put them in this military academy with intensive wraparound services focusing on their mental health, their literacy and their numeracy, working with their family. That's what we're talking about. Now, if you want to send them to prison, that's giving up on them. We don't give up. We'll deal with them one by one if we have to make it work and change their lives.
That is a good place. That is a good place to leave it. Sorry to interrupt you, gentlemen. Good place to leave it. Thank you for joining us, Mr English. Appreciate your time. So, any clearer there on Mr English's answer about his $1,000 a year on his tax expenditure?
No, but he's absolutely right that it's not about him. It is about the million or so families, and I think we're going to have to, over the next couple of weeks of this campaign, get to the bottom of this tax issue, because even those relatively small and modest tax changes National are talking about are worth $2,000 to an average home, and if we're not going to hear anything back from Labor about more details about its tax working group and what taxes it may be planning for the next 3 years, then we could be talking thousands and thousands of dollars for the average home, and Jacinda Ardern is refusing to tell us.
You could argue that his superannuation policy is a generational tax, because my generation are going to have to work 2 years longer in order to get their superannuation, and of course Māori have a lower life expectancy, which makes it intrinsically unfair.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to our panel for joining us tonight. That's it for the Newshub Leaders Debate. Thank you so much for joining us. Next up is Newshub Late. Good evening.